Hello.
Our story begins inside old Ben Kenobi's home within the Judland Wastelands. He saved Luke from a band of ruthless Tusken Raiders, and now, their conversation drifted from a princess to the past. Obi-Wan had seldomly thought of it since his last confrontation with Vader. Tying up loose ends with Maul brought a lot of closure to his past life as Obi-Wan, but this discussion with young Skywalker was a long time coming. It started with Obi-Wan's journey as a Jedi General during the infamous Clone Wars, before it shifted, slightly drastically, towards the truth Luke did not know. First, it had to do with Anakin Skywalker, the Jedi pilot and knight who served beside Obi-Wan like a brother. Of course, to Luke, his father sounded like a hero, which was Ben's intention. He wanted the boy to see Anakin how he once did, before Darth told him specifically that Vader killed the boy Obi-Wan trained. Kenobi held thoughts in his head and picked words to specifically spin the story in a manner he wanted to. Instead of telling Luke that his father was murdered and betrayed by a Jedi named Vader, he told him the truth. Anakin Skywalker was seduced by the dark side of the Force, and despite his great love and adoration for his friends and wife, he turned on all of them. A soaring heart within Luke rose and fell seamlessly. See, because Luke had been told his whole life that Anakin was a navigator, he simply believed that it was the best potential route for him. Now that he knew he was connected to a Jedi Knight and even a great queen and senator of Naboo, he felt like there was genuine purpose for his life, that he could be more than even he imagined for himself. He rode this little high, enjoyed the hope that existed in his heart before it was swept away from him in an instant. Luke listened as Ben struggled to tell the story. Anakin secretly married Padme, and eventually, he became so obsessed with controlling the fate of everyone close to him that people were pushed away. A student of Anakin's had been forcibly removed from the Jedi Order and died during the Purge. Anakin's best friend, Obi-Wan, had been nearly murdered in the very same mass execution that Anakin started. And then most importantly, the single person, other than Obi-Wan, that loved Anakin with purity in her heart. Luke listened with disgust as a very twisted perspective on the fall of Anakin Skywalker was placed before him. Obi-Wan had his own understanding of Anakin's fall to the dark side, but he was twisting things in the story to be slightly modified iterations of the truth. He did this for Luke's own sake, because the boy could very easily be swayed into trusting the dark side. If Anakin could fall after a full decade of being taught to reject darkness, then what about a boy who was only learning the truth for the first time? Everything bumbled up to Mustafar, with Obi-Wan recounting that Padme defended Anakin and his actions. She didn't know the truth because she believed in who her husband really was. This, of course, being Ben telling Luke about the youngling slaughter. Padme was a good person, Obi-Wan told the boy. She never thought that Anakin could become so vile. His actions at the temple were unthinkable. Obi-Wan held out hope too, despite orders from his instructor. Luke sat on the edge of his seat, with a whirlwind of emotions swelling within him, as he heard Ben move to Mustafar. Obi-Wan hoped that Padme could coax his brother down from the dark side. She had been such a place of stability for Anakin throughout the war, but unfortunately, no matter how much someone does for someone else, it just might not be enough. Ben described in very specific detail what he remembered seeing as he walked down the ramp of the Naboo starship. The light left Padme's eyes, and Obi-Wan thought that he had defeated Vader. He was more concerned with Padme when he left the Sith apprentice in defeat. Apparently, he had been wrong. A silence filled the small room, once the full, true, but twisted story had been told to Luke. He really didn't know how to process any of this. How was he meant to? He just learned that his father was not a spice navigator nor a good man. He was a Jedi turned mass murderer. Everything his uncle feared about Anakin was true, and at the cost of all of it, Luke considered what he lost out on. His mother, a person who he could have and should have had in his life, was taken from him. Of course, Obi-Wan forgot to mention Leia being Luke's sister, but it helped the framing of everything else regardless. Luke kept seeing this perfect person, the individual who stayed alive to make sure he could be born despite their suffering. Luke was supposed to see this as a reason to reject the darkness and to reject the Sith. Not that he really remembered his encounter with a dark acolyte nearly a decade before. And not to say that hearing this story made Luke want to become a user of the dark side, but it did strip him of something that filled almost every aspect of his life: hope. Ben Kenobi's attempt to guide Luke had taken out one key attribute of the Jedi existence. Without hope, there was no Rebel Alliance or Jedi Path, or Rebel movement on Lothal, or potential to save darksiders like Asajj Ventress or Barriss Offee. The galaxy was huge, massive even, and full of life willing to change. If a separatist assassin could join the light, or a former Inquisitor see the right path, then anyone could be changed. Anyone who could be given the opportunity to change could turn to the light, but not anymore. Now Luke knew that the whole galaxy was an arena, and that anyone associated with the Sith needed to die. While learning these quote-unquote truths about his father didn't directly change anything on Tatooine, it did change the boy on the Death Star. Luke couldn't really access the Force. He couldn't sense Vader or anything of the sort once they arrived. But because Ben refused to allow Luke to come with him, the moisture farmer grew impatient when they split up. With Ben rushing off to turn off the tractor beam and the trio sitting in an operation bay, Luke slipped away. He gave Han and Chewie an incentive for finding Leia and bringing her back to the Falcon. But Luke had his own mission. Still carrying a lightsaber he almost put through his own head, he started down the corridors of the Imperial facility. He wasn't reckless or totally stupid, but he did get a slight feel for the lightsaber when he ignited the weapon and slashed it down against a very few unlucky stormtroopers that he snuck up on. Very important context being that the troopers didn't see Luke coming. They were killed when they were looking a different direction. Skywalker wanted Vader to die. As a boy from Tatooine, a planet with technically no relation to the Clone War, Luke's only concept of fighting was skirmishes with Tusken Raiders and bar fights. He couldn't really wrap his mind around masters of lightsaber combat and of the Force. So once he started using his glow stick against unsuspecting Imperial targets, he felt powerful. He understood how the Jedi became so strong regardless of their purge. If he could use this weapon against any opponent and destroy them, then how could said opponent defend themselves? Vader, while looking for Obi-Wan inside the Death Star, started to pick up on a slight hint of someone else. An individual that wasn't having an awakening, but certainly finding themselves within the Force. Because no one probed Luke's mind or forced their will on him, Skywalker wasn't feeling or responding directly to the Force. He was simply hunting for Vader. His one directive was to not escape the superstation, but to get revenge. Luke could not be the individual to encounter Vader first though. Luckily for him, the Dark Lord was searching for Kenobi. He desperately craved this rematch. He wanted to make the aging Jedi Master pay, and honestly, it was Vader's true validation for choosing the dark side. If he could finally defeat his own master, then he could realize his turn towards darkness by killing off the last person who truly knew Anakin Skywalker. Yoda wasn't something that Vader counted as someone who knew Anakin, technically. Regardless, their lightsaber duel started with a slow couple of connections of the blade, before intensifying. Luke, who wasn't with Han or Leia or Chewie, chased the sound of lightsabers clashing away, leading to what Luke thought was his moment. He ignited his father's saber, and Vader turned back after pushing Obi-Wan backwards. Ben yelled out, telling Luke to run away, but Skywalker raised his weapon and told Vader that he would pay. The Sith Lord mocked Luke, telling him he killed a lot of people that he didn't remember. Luke would need to be more specific. The young Jedi rushed in, and with the sweep of his opponent's hand, Luke was thrown from his feet into the wall. Ben got in front of Luke again and told him to get out of here, as Vader questioned Ben for getting such a worthless student. Obi-Wan clapped back, telling Vader that he was a far greater student than himself. Their sabers collided immediately. Luke pushed himself away from the smashing of weapons and watched. Ben Kenobi was not the warrior he was 10 years ago, nor the one he was during the Clone Wars, but the muscle memory was still there. Training Anakin for 13 years and defeating Vader helped Ben hold control over what little he could. Vader's strikes were vicious as they had been a decade before, but Kenobi still knew how to play mind games with his apprentice. After all, because Luke refused to leave the site of the battle, Kenobi needed to have Vader dealt with. But this encounter would not be like his previous one 9 years ago. He was much older now, and much more worn down by the suns of Tatooine. The Jedi Master's connection to the Force was much more important to him than his mastery over the blade. Regardless of his specific focuses since truly becoming Ben Kenobi, he held his own against the growingly angry Vader. Like Ezra on the Fall years before, every time Luke tried to involve himself in this duel, he was flung away. Skywalker remained determined to get his revenge. He didn't call it that in the moment because he was clearly fighting for survival in a fight he shouldn't have been in. As Ben and Vader moved through another corridor leading them to the site of the Millennium Falcon, the truth came out. Luke forced his saber against Vader's and told him he'd pay for killing his mother, and Vader taunted who he thought to be a young Jedi because he could have done it to anyone's mother. But Luke hit back by calling Vader his father and his wife Padme Amidala because she had given birth to him after Mustafar. A whirlwind of emotions poured from Vader, the first of which was offense, and Luke held his saber over his body before again being launched from his feet. At the same time, Vader accused Obi-Wan of telling his student deceitful lies, but as he swung for Kenobi, the Jedi Master jabbed forward. This was closely related to how Palpatine jabbed his own saber, and completely unlike anything Kenobi had done in front of Vader. It was mostly an age-related swing from Kenobi, because it helped Obi-Wan get momentum he needed, but it worked. The Sith Lord was jabbed by the saber in the metal plating in his stomach, and he immediately went on defense, refusing to choke away another victory because of rage. With all of his focus returning to his former master again, Luke regathered himself. His head was dizzy, but having his head knocked back into the thick walls again did something for him. It helped him recognize something. The Force fed into him. His minor concussion helped ease his mind into trusting the indescribable Force, because so much of the restriction prior came from mentally blocking himself from trusting it. He felt and saw a vision. He saw his mother Padme and her happy face. She was holding twins, and she told Luke to find himself. No matter what, he should always come first. He could see Padme as her whole self, not just some hologram that he might find if he ever survives this encounter. This was mother and son communicating for the first time ever. Luke felt a surge of energy burst through his body, and with sheer adrenaline he got to his feet and charged the Sith Lord in front of him. Obi-Wan was slipping by this point. A relentless assault from a very pissed off and very afraid Darth Vader kept Ben on the back pedal. Vader would never lose to Obi-Wan again, and the truth is he was right. He wouldn't lose to Obi-Wan. Luke's lightsaber shoved forward and ignited just as Vader was swinging down to kill his former instructor. The burst of blue light from the weapon that killed so many young Jedi before brought a sense of finality to their endless suffering. So many young Jedi died because of what Anakin had done, and now, right here inside the technological terror he helped create, it came to a conclusion. The satisfaction of destroying Obi-Wan Kenobi died in Vader's hands as his mechanical suit started to crumble. His saber lodged itself in the wall, and he fell over to the feet of his master, and then everything went dark. Vader's loss of patience costed him everything. The combination of being hit with memories of Padme from some boy that had similar facial features to his wife, and that of course of being jabbed by Obi-Wan, lost him the battle. Had he remained steadfast with everything he had learned since becoming Vader, it would have been a walk in the park. But unfortunately, as Luke now understood, the dark side took, and while his mother's vision told him to choose a path for himself, he knew what he wanted. It aligned with the Jedi in many ways, but not fully. Luke's return to Yavin had been asking him a great many questions. Most revolved around his feelings. Luke had just murdered someone, and while it was in the action of defense technically, Luke never should have been involved in that fight. Obi-Wan wanted to scold him. Skywalker, though, not known for his lying, told every lie he needed to. He did not use revenge as a method for destroying Vader. He simply wanted to rid the galaxy from that plague, the plague of darkness. And the truth is, these were half-truths. Luke wasn't totally lying, but he didn't want to be a Jedi either. That path did not call to him, because hope was removed from his life. Before learning the truth about his mother, he craved adventure. He wanted to see the galaxy and travel across the stars because he hoped for that. Now, though, he believed that his purpose was to destroy the dark side of the Force. Vader was something so terrifying and unexplainable that it needed to be killed. All users of the dark side deserved such a fate. Luke didn't destroy his hope, nor had he become completely cynical. He just understood that this galaxy wasn't large enough for individuals that desired destruction and darkness. These people could not be saved, they were evil. But before Luke could learn the lessons of the Force from his master, so that he could become the most effective dark side hunter, he had another foe, the Death Star. Ben's lesson about trusting the Force would transpire here, and despite Han leaving Yavin and never returning, without Vader, Luke's trench run would be a success and he would be the hero of the day. But simple heroics and the theatrics of receiving a medal from his twin sister weren't enough to keep him grounded. Luke had a mission to complete, one that he knew in his heart of hearts that he needed to do. This, also in Luke's mind, was the perfect way to mesh everything together. He could, in essence, travel the galaxy while protecting people who had little to defend themselves with. To the older Jedi, first Obi-Wan, then Yoda, this would not come off as anti-Jedi rhetoric, because Luke never phrased this as a revenge-based method. He only explained to them that he wanted to rid the galaxy of the darkness. And an Obi-Wan who was completely convinced that Luke had proven his mettle by defeating Vader, with a lot of help on the side, he believed that Luke was truly the chosen one. This understanding of the prophecy, the same one that directly led to the Jedi Purge, would lead Obi-Wan and Yoda to begin training on the Force and lightsaber combat. In the meantime, the Rebel Alliance with Leia vanished towards other Rebel bases, as the inspiration of Luke's heroic victory over the Death Star inspired thousands of new fighters to join the cause. Skywalker's time on Dagobah was arduous, and worse than anything he ever experienced on Tatooine. This mostly came from the intensity of the training sessions conducted by the former Grand Master and by Obi-Wan. The two Jedi, instead of training the twins from birth, were pushing 19 years of training onto one of the twins as fast and as hard as they could, because they refused to fight Palpatine alone. Luke should have wanted to leave, but his determination to end this age of chaos kept him grounded. In many ways, Luke enjoyed the Jedi training, but it wasn't the work of a true Jedi. The traditional sense of the Order would be using the Force for defense, never attack. And while yes, Yoda taught that to Luke, they were also preparing young Skywalker for a fight against the Emperor, the very individual that Yoda could have defeated had he not given up 19 years ago. Luke, mentally, spent most of this time trying to find himself. Who was the true Luke Skywalker? He lost his family. His father was a murderer that killed millions. His father killed his mother, and Luke had murdered his own father. Not to mention, the family was probably murdered by Vader too. By the line of succession, Luke should theoretically become Vader in the end. That was his destiny, the one created by Anakin Skywalker that he should fulfill. The burden left over his shoulders because of his father's actions weighed on his every step, because in the end, Luke too killed millions, and every single one of those deaths weighed on his soul. Killing is easy when you're blinded by hate. Luke murdered stormtroopers on his way to fighting Vader, but even when he killed his own father, he felt no satisfaction. That should have been the indication that simply hunting darksiders wouldn't bring Luke fulfillment. But it wasn't that. He didn't see it in that light. He mostly understood that killing his father was a burden that Anakin put onto him, not the other way around. A wrong that needed to be made right, just like it had to be with every other darksider. Again, Luke wasn't becoming cynical or dissociative. He simply had a purpose that he wanted to fulfill. The dark side had to be eradicated, and he would bring it to its end. He followed Yoda's lessons, he listened appropriately to Obi-Wan's methods, and continued to develop the Force. But as his father before him, Luke spent his off time training with his lightsaber. Being that he was on Dagobah, he shouldn't have found a kyber crystal, but he found one in a cave. And thanks to his discovery, he would construct himself a new saber. While Luke may have not needed two weapons, he found it necessary to understand all forms of combat before returning to the galaxy. The stories he was told about Sidious frightened him. He believed he had to be ready. On the other side of the galaxy, not hidden through the dense fog of Dagobah, was Luke's greatest threat in the galaxy. Emperor Palpatine watched the disappointing film of Vader's death over and over again. He tried to collect everything he could on this Luke Skywalker individual, but even with the updated Imperial databases after the Purge, they didn't have any information on him. Even the very little resources at Polis Massa didn't make it to the Emperor's desk. Palpatine focused on tearing down the Rebel Alliance, assuming that the Jedi boy was there, but that was not the case. Being that his lead Jedi hunter and most of the Inquisitors had been destroyed, Sidious employed whoever he could to hunt Skywalker. These were grunt-level Force users, individuals that were perceived as weaker than the Inquisitors. For example, the Knights of Ren, the Acolytes of the Beyond, or Ochia Bestoon. They all found themselves under the Imperial payroll as they searched for a boy who destroyed the Death Star. Sidious did not want young Skywalker dead. He wanted a new apprentice. While the Emperor tried his best to find and capture Luke Skywalker, the prized student continued his training on Dagobah. To make life a little easier on Luke, Yoda and Obi-Wan would tell charming stories about Padme to make him feel better, but he also refused to hear even the smallest bit of positivity about his father, and that really highlighted the difference between Luke prior to learning about his mother's death and after. He believed in people and their ability to change. Now he saw all darkness as a plague that had to be forcibly removed. And despite this being his belief, and the Jedi Masters giving him specific instructions, they also didn't necessarily discourage these beliefs to rise. Obi-Wan and Yoda were Clone War veterans. They had a very skewed interpretation of what it meant to be a Jedi. The basics were all there, but they also, like Luke, believed that darkness needed to be expunged from the galaxy. After 4 full years on Dagobah, with limited interactions with the rebels, Luke and Obi-Wan left. Yoda passed away of natural causes and a brand new Jedi Knight emerged. Luke Skywalker utilized a broken up form of Jar-Kai, with elements of Form 5 and Form 3 thrown in for good measure. The Jedi taught him the Force, and then instructed him with the saber. And while much of his father's attributes were apparent throughout the training, he listened better, especially after their first year on Dagobah together. Luke did not rejoin with the rebels, as they prepared for their own attack on the Empire. He instead sought out darksiders to test his new skills on. Additionally, it should be said that all the added effort from Yoda to instruct Luke over 4 full years pushed him closer to death a little bit faster. So these preparations for Endor were about a month or so out, and that didn't include the Death Star plans and several dead Bothans. The rebels had no clue they were gathering up to fight at Endor. They were just preparing to fight the Empire. The rebellion was strong, but they needed another anchor. They were missing a true galactic stage victory to tell the galaxy that this was a real deal movement. Mon Mothma was still preaching through speeches, and Leia was the true hero of the Alliance. They just needed one major victory. And Luke, despite not participating as a rebel hero, aside from the mythos of destroying the first Death Star, planned to help them in his own way. His hunt for the Sith started with little-known dark side acolytes. He'd encounter Merrick, the Knights of Ren, the Acolytes of the Beyond, Ochia Bestoon, and even Baylan Skoll. Obi-Wan remained with his apprentice, but didn't participate in the engagements, growing too frail himself. Luke may have torn through these easier opponents, but they were no Sidious, and Obi-Wan knew better than his eager apprentice did. Skywalker lacked a true defeat, a true moment to define his time as a Jedi. He got really lucky against Vader, and the others were individuals far less capable than himself after 4 full years of training. The only engagement that actually challenged Luke was the one with Baylan Skoll, which also ended up with Shin Hati falling into Alliance hands. She wasn't associated with the Empire, and she surrendered after her master died to Luke's hands. Skywalker didn't have the heart to kill her because, in many ways, he saw himself in her. She was around 17 when he defeated Baylan, someone she considered a father figure. Letting her live was a mistake in Luke's mind, but Obi-Wan also wouldn't allow young Skywalker the opportunity to execute a surrendering opponent. It led directly to worry from Obi-Wan that maybe he had been neglectful of Luke's darker attributes, but this type of hostility never appeared towards regular people. For example, if Luke fought off a bunch of stormtroopers, he wouldn't execute those who surrendered, basically saying Obi-Wan was forgiving of these attributes because they were only directed towards dark side users, which is, yes, very hypocritical. Chasing down the Emperor was much easier than Ben ever thought it would be. Did he regret not convincing Yoda to do this earlier? Probably. But essentially, in the week before the Death Star plans found Mon Mothma's hands, Skywalker and Kenobi arrived on Coruscant. Luke demanded a fair challenge with the Emperor who was hunting him. Luke knew this because he killed all of the Emperor's hunters. The Sith Lord, who watched employed darksiders vanish from the galactic map for the past few weeks, accepted this 1 versus 1 challenge. He welcomed it. A boy so foolish to believe he could stand his own against the greatest Sith known in galactic history. Of course, Sidious was arrogant. He had done it all, won everything, and survived the Chosen One. He would give Luke the Anakin Skywalker treatment, or Skywalker would die. Very simple equation. When Luke made it to the Emperor's throne room, he hero monologued about the soon-to-be destruction of the Sith, and the rise of a new light, a new hope even. Sidious allowed the boy to go on his tangent, and once he finished, he blasted an unsuspecting Luke with Force electricity. It was a burst of power that an extremely lucky and victorious Luke had never seen before. Do you really think the Knights of Ren used Force electricity? Nuh-uh. Luke smashed into the ground and rolled backwards as Sidious stepped down the stairs to greet his Jedi opponent. Outside the temple, royal guards surrounded Old Ben, who knelt on the ground, waiting for his apprentice to defeat the Sith. He felt immediate pain from Luke, and he worried that his student wasn't ready for this fight, but he technically could not interfere, or Sidious would kill them both. Obi-Wan rightly believed that Palpatine would try to seduce Luke, and luckily for Skywalker, he had been taught to hate the dark side. Sidious clasped his hands together and laughed at Skywalker, who had been so foolish to come here so unprepared. Luke pushed himself off the ground, and Sidious returned a monologue about how the light could only give so much. Yet the Dark Lord appropriately avoided giving Vader credit. He explained that his former pupil, Lord Vader, was foolish. He destroyed everything he loved because of his quest for greater power. But the true dark side embraces compassion. It enjoys love. It endures suffering. If Luke could find it within himself to join the dark side, then he could have so much more than he ever knew. It wasn't his burden to make amends for his father's mistakes. Skywalker hesitated for a moment because this was a perspective he hadn't yet heard before. But if it were true, and this is what Luke settled on to make his decision, then Sidious would have spent every day of the last 23 years searching for him. If he cared about Padme, he would have done it for her. Skywalker's emerald and blue sabers shot to life, and Sidious responded with annoyance. He referred to Luke as a Jedi, but Skywalker was no Jedi, because he would finish what they could not. Palpatine's crimson saber ignited, and he blocked the first aggressive and swift strike from his very young opponent. Viciously, Palpatine jabbed back, swinging around his body and launching his saber into Luke's fragile defense. After winning so many battles against nothing opponents, Luke's confidence dropped at the realization of what he had done to himself. Blue and green flashed before his face, and Sidious, unmoved by his opponent's heroic attempt, continued forward. Even without touching these weapons in years, he was unstoppable. Luke backed away, stabbing and sweeping, but never landing a hit. Palpatine's effortless attack was terrifying, but it wasn't as scary as the rise of the dead. Being that this was the home of the Jedi, the temple started to flicker alive. Lights inside the structure flipped on and off as Luke got back into the engagement. Sidious, as he fought off this young Jedi, felt the rise of apparitions. Something felt so familiar but distant. Every Jedi he had ever killed individually appeared, starting with Master Windu. Behind him, he could feel Master Fisto and the others on Coruscant that he killed that one fateful night. He bashed again at Luke but missed, this time as Yoda's Force Ghost appeared, presenting Sidious with a slight terror. His true enemy, the one true rival in the Force he had, arrived. He swung at the ghost but cut through nothing but air. He turned back to stop Luke, who stabbed out again. Outside the temple, Ben Kenobi started floating above the ground, accessing the Force to his greatest ability and presenting himself in every way possible, through individuals Palpatine would know. As Sidious tried to stop these ranging ghosts, he saw Anakin Skywalker. He had returned, and he stood behind Luke, next to Obi-Wan, and watched as young Luke Skywalker attacked again. The terror and confusion of all the ghosts returning to haunt him overwhelmed him. Sidious stabbed at each individual apparition because they looked physically present. This Force projection by Obi-Wan was not just confusing, but absolutely terrifying. And Sidious, Master of Darkness, successor to Plagueis the Wise, died at the hands of a boy not even a third of his age. When Sidious's body dropped to the ground, it wasn't surrounded by dozens of haunting faces. He was defeated by the true bringer of balance to the Force. Luke heaved heavily as he held his sabers, not fully grasping what had happened here. He saw those ghosts too, but did not understand their significance. Not even that of his own father, who he did not recognize as Anakin. When Luke escaped the temple, he found Ben Kenobi lying on the ground, surrounded by a confused dozen royal guards. Their lives would be taken, and Luke would tend to his master, but it was too late. Ben overexerted himself. He did everything he could to save Luke and help bring balance to the Force. The job was not done yet, but he let Luke part with a similar message to what Luke's Padme vision had. In his own final moments of life, Ben Kenobi wanted Luke, who he had come to see as a son in their training for the past 4 years, to choose his own path for himself. Skywalker took those last words to heart. He started his choices and his own new life with a message to the Alliance about the Imperial plan at Endor, leading to a rebel victory at Eridu and then back at Endor, 2 back-to-back space engagements that knocked the air out of the Imperial regime. Basically, after Eridu, the Empire panicked. Luke continued helping though. He was on the sidelines and avoiding any connection to the Jedi or Sith. He would live his life for himself, and he searched for more dark acolytes to destroy. None of them would present the challenge that Sidious presented, and he knew that. His work as an operative for the Alliance and eventually New Republic helped them weed out future plans for the First Order, which would have come at a planned Imperial defeat at Jakku. Because Luke wasn't preoccupied on starting a new Jedi Order or finding its old relics, his focus on hunting darksiders led to undermining Palpatine's plans to rebuild himself and his empire if it fell after his death, which it did. Luke's life work would be in the destruction of users of the dark side and ending Palpatine's contingencies, even doing it himself at Exegol. He continued to support his sister from afar, and eventually, over the years, they actually built a relationship together. Because Luke didn't care about Force sects, he refused to train Shin Hati, who remained in Alliance custody. He found new uses for all of his powers outside of destroying dark side-obsessed individuals. Luke could be anything he wanted, whether it was New Republic hero or pod racing champion. His life became one great adventure, the one he hoped for. That hope that initially made him want to leave Tatooine found him again as an adult, and he let it fuel his every action, leading to collections of new friends, a partner, a family, a stronger relationship with one of the most influential voices in the New Republic, his sister. They were truly brother and sister. While the Jedi and Sith would both be destroyed thanks to Luke's choices, it would all benefit the galaxy. A great reset without the First Order or the return of either Force religion would give the galaxy its time to heal and move on. And in the future, a new order would rise. Before Luke passed away though, decades later, he would recount everything he learned, so that in the future, hopefully, none of these same sins could be repeated. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to all the patrons for supporting the channel. Smash that like button. Let's talk about this story. A little cynical. Definitely, this story, I really had a lot of fun with this perspective from Luke, and kind of like making you feel like you don't know where he's going to go. I don't really think you're going to get this. It's possible. I don't really think you're going to get the idea that Luke will go full dark side in this, but as close as he can to being a darksider without the Sith is kind of what I wanted you to feel, is that he's going to, I want you to feel that it's going to skew off in these different directions and not truly follow the Jedi way. And it's kind of ironic because Obi-Wan's final action in A New Hope, which does directly, especially in canon, directly lead to Luke's action in Last Jedi, is true symbolism of the Jedi, winning a battle without attack, without aggression. And Luke never gets that experience, never sees that. He never sees Ben sacrifice himself because he joins a fight. And that fight with Vader is a little iffy. I know I've done What If Ben Defeated, Vader a long time ago, and some people had some very opinions on that. Totally fair. But I think in a scenario where Ben is actively fighting to protect Luke, he can win. It's a combination. It's that Ben is actively fighting. It's that Vader is confused and angrier and not really patient because he just heard Padme's name, and it's also that he gets wounded. All of that kind of throws off his mojo, and that's why he loses. But without having that heroic sacrifice, with hope literally being taken out of his heart by Obi-Wan's message, which is unintentional, but I feel like that's a natural reaction for Luke to have, Luke doesn't really fall in love with the Jedi. I don't think he really falls in love with the lie. And so you have not totally cynical, but almost like this dissociative Luke that's kind of roaming around in his young 20s or his mid 20s, just kind of looking for purpose. And then after he kills Palpatine and kills a couple more darksiders, he's like, all right, maybe that hope can come back. Maybe there's hope for something more than just, hunting people down. And in the end, he does restore balance, but he also gives the galaxy its breath of fresh air to exist without the Sith or the Jedi. And I think that's kind of beautiful and symbolic in a way. So I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all. Spread the love, and always, my friends, may the Force be with you.